Look at him, still sitting there. The voice carried across the parking lot the way a bad smell carries, low and wide and impossible to pretend you hadn't noticed. It belonged to a man named Trace Hollis, 31 years old, 240 pounds distributed across a frame that had never once in its life been asked to carry more than it wanted to. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, a half-finished beer in one hand, and the particular satisfaction of a man reviewing something he had already done and finding it good. Behind him, 8 other men in cut vests leaned against their bikes, or stood in the loose, practiced formation of people who travel in a group specifically so that they never have to be accountable as individuals. The man they were looking at was sitting on the asphalt at the edge of the gravel lot, his back against the wooden post of a highway bar's signpost, one hand pressed flat against his ribs where something had been broken or was close to it. His cane lay 6 feet away where it had been kicked. He had not moved to retrieve it. His name was Earl Decker, and he was 79 years old. He wore a faded flannel shirt the color of old brickwork, the left sleeve rolled to the elbow and the right hanging loose over a forearm that had been rebuilt twice by surgeons over the course of 30 years. Worn canvas trousers. Work boots that had walked a very great distance in a very long life and showed every mile of it. His hair was white and thin. His face was deeply lined, the kind of face that has spent decades in wind and sun and hard weather without asking for shelter from any of it. His hands, the one pressed to his ribs, the one resting open on his thigh, were the hands of a man in his late 70s, liver spotted, the knuckles enlarged, the veins raised under the skin. But the one on his thigh was open and still and unhurried, as if nothing that had just happened was capable of making it tremble. He had not said anything since they'd put him on the ground. He had not asked them to stop. He had not pleaded. He had not called out for anyone in the lot. He had simply received what was done to him and then settled into stillness the way a stone settles on a riverbed, not passive, not defeated, but rooted at a depth that the current could not reach. The Riverside Tavern sat on a state highway in the hill country outside San Antonio, Texas, the kind of place that had been there long enough to become permanent. A low building with a corrugated metal roof, a gravel lot big enough for 30 vehicles, neon beer signs in the windows humming with their insectile glow, a screen door that never quite closed all the way and banged softly in the evening wind every few seconds. The air smelled of sawdust floors and spilled beer and the dry cedar and limestone smell of the Texas hills in late afternoon. The jukebox inside was playing something slow and mournful. It had gone to the next song before anyone in the lot had moved. Trace Hollis took a pull of his beer and looked at the old man with the flat, proprietary gaze of someone who has decided the situation is resolved. "You want to know what your problem is, old man?" he said. He walked forward 3 steps, just enough to make the distance between them intimate without closing it entirely. The performance was for his crew. It was always for his crew. Your problem is you don't know where you belong. Walk into a place like you own it. Take up a stool at the bar like you got something to prove. He gestured at the cane lying in the gravel. Man who needs a stick to walk around doesn't come in here on a Friday night and mouth off to people who didn't ask for his company. Earl Decker said nothing. "Nothing to say now, huh?" Trace looked back at his men with the grin of a man who has made a point. 2 of them smiled. 3 of them were looking at the old man on the ground with the particular expression of people who are beginning to suspect they have crossed a line they cannot see clearly from where they are standing, which is the same as having already crossed it. One of those 3 was a woman named Carla Briggs. She was 24 years old, the youngest person in the group by 5 years, and she had come out tonight because her boyfriend was one of Trace's crew, and she had not known, when the evening started, that it would become this. She had watched the whole thing from the bar, the way the old man had come in quietly and taken a stool at the far end, the way Trace had decided that quiet was a provocation, the way it had escalated from words to the parking lot in less than 8 minutes. She had watched the cane go down. She was standing now near the side of the building, a few feet from the payphone mounted to the exterior wall. Payphones had no business still existing in this part of the country, but this one did. Serviced and functional, kept by the bar owner as a point of philosophical stubbornness against the cellular age. Carla Briggs had been looking at it for 90 seconds. She looked at the old man on the ground. She looked at the phone. She thought about her boyfriend, and then she thought about her grandfather, who had been a quiet man in worn clothing who did not talk about what he had done in his life and who she had understood too late. She walked to the phone. She fed it quarters. She called the one number she could think of that had any chance of mattering. The main line for the military base 14 miles down the highway, which she knew because her cousin had been stationed there for 3 years, and she had called him on this exact phone more than once. Lackland Air Force Base. How may I direct your call? I need. She stopped. She did not know what she needed. She tried again. There's a man hurt in the parking lot of the Riverside Tavern on Highway 46. He's old. He's been beaten. His name is Earl Decker. She was not sure why she said the name. She had heard it only once when the old man had introduced himself to the bartender in the quiet, unhurried manner of someone who is not used to needing his name to do anything for him. Please, somebody needs to come. The voice on the other end of the line was professional and measured, the voice of a duty operator who had taken 10,000 calls and knew how to receive information without adding noise to it. Then, say that name again. Carla said it again. The silence that followed was not the silence of being put on hold. It was a different kind of silence, the silence of a room in which the temperature has suddenly changed, in which everyone has looked up from what they were doing at the same moment without knowing why. It stretched for 4 seconds. 5. Then the voice that came back was the same voice, but entirely different in register, stripped of its professional neutral surface down to something urgent and direct. What is your exact location? She gave it. Do not leave. Is he conscious? Yes, keep him still. Help is on the way. A pause. 3 words, delivered with a precision that felt less like reassurance and more like an operational order. Do not leave. The line did not go dead. It stayed open, and through it Carla could hear the background of what she had reached, not an administrative office, as it turned out, but a duty desk adjacent to a team room, and in that room she could hear, faintly, the sound of a space reorganizing itself. Chairs, boots, a voice saying a name she didn't catch, and then the same voice, louder, saying it again. And something in the way the room responded told her without any further explanation that the name of the quiet old man on the ground outside the Riverside Tavern meant something to these people that she did not yet have the frame of reference to measure. The senior chief petty officer who had taken that call had known the name Earl Decker for 11 years. He had known it the way men in certain communities know the names of certain men. Not from official channels, not from a record he had been required to read, but from the particular reverence of older operators who said the name in the manner of people pointing at something you should take care not to look away from. He relayed the name and the location in 7 seconds. He was reaching for his own keys before the relay was complete. The team commander, Lieutenant Commander Harris, was in the middle of a briefing when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He picked up. He listened for 11 seconds. He said, "We leave in 4 minutes," and walked out of the room without explaining to the 3 officers still seated at the table, because the explanation would have taken longer than 4 minutes and the situation did not have that kind of time. 9 men assembled in the parking lot of the team facility in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Not in uniform. In civilian clothes, which was its own kind of statement. Because 9 men in civilian clothes who move the way these 9 men moved communicate something that a uniform only approximates. They took 3 vehicles. In the parking lot of the Riverside Tavern, Trace Hollis had decided that the old man's continued silence was a second provocation. He had crouched down to be at eye level, a posture he had adopted because it felt like dominance and was actually proximity, and he was saying something about respect, about how it was earned, about how a man who couldn't stand up on his own 2 feet without a stick had a particular kind of nerve walking into an establishment and acting as if the room owed him something, and his voice had taken on the grinding momentum of a man who is running out of new things to say and is therefore repeating himself with increasing volume to cover the deficit. Earl Decker looked at him. His eyes were pale blue, the color of a winter sky on the far edge of a storm, clear in the center and darkening toward the horizon. And they possessed a depth that had nothing to do with anger and nothing to do with fear, a depth like looking down into very cold and very still water where you could not see the bottom but understood that the bottom was there and was not shallow. "You should go home," Earl said. His voice was a low, dry rasp, the words measured and unhurried, carrying no plea and no threat. The tone of a man making a weather observation that he knows will be ignored but feels obligated to offer anyway. Trace stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed and looked back at his crew. "He's telling me to go home." He stood from the ground. He shook his head in the manner of a man who cannot believe his good fortune at such a perfect illustration of the world's absurdity. He looked back at Earl and reached down and put his hand on the old man's left shoulder. The parking lot disappeared. The neon hum of the tavern signs cut out. The cedar and limestone smell of the Texas hills was gone, replaced in a single frame by heat. Not the dry ambient heat of a summer evening, but the saturating, pressurized heat of the Mekong Delta in August, wet and close and total. The kind of heat that lives inside your clothes and inside your lungs and does not leave any part of you alone. The sound of the jukebox was gone. In its place, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades somewhere overhead, and underneath that, closer and more immediate, the percussion of small arms fire moving through dense vegetation from a direction that changed with the terrain. He was 23 years old. He was moving through elephant grass on his belly, the grass higher than a man standing, the blades sharp enough to cut, the ground beneath him soft and yielding and smelling of rot and standing water and something older and darker. 50 meters to his left, 2 members of his element were down. He knew this not because he had seen them, but because the radio had gone quiet in the specific way a radio goes quiet when the men carrying it are no longer able to carry it. He still had his radio. He had the radio because Sergeant First Class Thomas Beaumont had handed it to him 4 minutes ago, in the flat, unhurried manner of a man transferring something important to someone he trusted, and had said 2 words, "Keep moving," before turning back toward the sound of the firing to buy the time that the transfer required. Beaumont had been 51 years old, which had seemed ancient to Earl at 23, and he had been in the service since Korea. And he had the kind of stillness that Earl had spent the first year of his own service trying to understand, and had eventually concluded was not a technique, but a destination. A place a man arrived at after he had been through enough that the fear and the noise and the chaos had all burned off, leaving something underneath that was just clarity. Beaumont did not come back. Earl moved. He carried the radio for 3 hours through terrain that had no paths and no landmarks, navigating by compass and by the sound of the river, until he reached the extraction point with 2 other surviving members of the element. And he called in the position, and the rotors got louder, and the grass flattened, and he put 2 men on the helicopter and got on last. He had carried the radio on his right forearm for the entire 3 hours, gripped in the crook of his arm where the surgeons would later work twice, because his right hand had been occupied with something else and he had not been willing to put either thing down. He had carried Beaumont's watch on his wrist since that night. 3 years. A Benrus field watch, military issue, the crystal scratched, the band replaced 3 times, still running. The parking lot came back. The neon signs. The jukebox, finishing its song and starting another. Trace Hollis's hand on his left shoulder. Earl's right hand, resting on his thigh, had not moved. He looked at the watch on his wrist. He said nothing. Carla Briggs, still standing near the payphone with the receiver in her hand, heard something that no one else in the parking lot had registered yet. A low sound beneath the ambient noise of the highway. A sound felt through the soles of the feet before it was heard with the ears. A vibration that was coming from the direction of the state road and was growing. 3 sets of headlights turned into the gravel lot. The vehicles were civilian, a pickup truck, an SUV, a second pickup. But they parked with a precision that civilian vehicles did not usually achieve, forming a loose perimeter around the near end of the lot without apparent coordination, as if the 3 drivers had rehearsed this or simply understood space in a way that made improvisation unnecessary. The engines cut. The doors opened. 9 men got out. They were in jeans and work shirts and boots, some of them young, some of them in their 30s. One of them with gray at his temples, who moved with the economy of a man who has not wasted a physical gesture in 2 decades. They were not large in the theatrical sense. They were not the men you would pick out of a crowd for their size. They were something else, a quality of attention, a particular stillness in motion, the way they oriented to the space without seeming to look at it, the way they placed themselves without seeming to choose their positions. They formed a loose circle around the near end of the lot in approximately 8 seconds. They said nothing. Trace Hollis straightened up. He looked at the men. He did a count. He looked at his own crew. And then he looked at the 9 men again, and something that had been very comfortable in him for the past 20 minutes became substantially less comfortable. The man with gray at his temples walked forward. He walked directly toward Earl Decker, and the directness of his path communicated that Trace Hollis and his crew did not constitute an obstacle worth acknowledging, which was a more thorough dismissal than anything said out loud could have achieved. He stopped in front of Earl. He looked at the watch on Earl's wrist, then at Earl's face, then at the ribs Earl was holding. He crouched down. "Earl," he said quietly, "I'm Harris. We came as fast as we could." Earl looked at him with those pale blue eyes. "Didn't need to," Earl said. "We know," Harris said. "We came anyway." He looked up then at Trace Hollis, who was 2 feet away and had still not removed his hand from Earl's shoulder, and the look Harris gave him was a specific and calibrated instrument. Not anger, not threat, but the absolute. Total clarity of a man communicating a precise message to another man without any ambiguity about whether it had been received. Hollis removed his hand from Earl's shoulder. Harris stood. When he spoke to the assembled group, he did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The parking lot was very quiet. "This man," Harris said, "is Earl Decker, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired." He paused. He served in naval special warfare from 1962 to 1987. 25 years. He was one of the original members of SEAL Team 2 in the Atlantic Theater. He completed 11 combat deployments, 4 in Vietnam, 2 in the Dominican Republic, 3 classified operations that have since been partially declassified, and 2 that have not been and will not be. The jukebox changed songs. Nobody looked at it. His awards include the Bronze Star, with valor. A second Bronze Star with valor. The Silver Star, for actions in the Mekong Delta in 1967, in which Chief Decker, serving as the senior surviving operator following the loss of his element's primary and secondary leadership, assumed command of the remaining personnel, completed the assigned mission objective, and extracted 2 wounded teammates to the landing zone over a period of 4 hours through denied territory, sustaining significant injury to his right forearm in the process. Harris's voice was even throughout. The Purple Heart. A second Purple Heart. The Navy Cross, awarded 1971 for a period of sustained extraordinary valor during a classified direct action mission in which Chief Decker's actions were cited by the commanding officer as, and I am quoting from the citation, the proximate reason that any member of the element survived to report the results of the operation. Trace Hollis had gone very still. His crew had the posture of men who are beginning to understand the specific shape of what they have done, which is a different and more comprehensive understanding than simply knowing that you have done something wrong. He has carried a Benrus field watch on his right wrist since August 14, 1967, Harris said. It belonged to Sergeant First Class Thomas Beaumont, who gave it to Earl Decker along with the element's radio and the order to keep moving, and who did not make it to the extraction point. Harris looked at Trace Hollis directly. The watch you were close enough to see when you put your hand on his shoulder. The watch that has been running for 57 years on a wrist that has never once forgotten who gave it. The parking lot was silent except for the sound of the highway, and the jukebox and the screen door banging softly in the evening wind. The legal consequences for Trace Hollis and 2 members of his crew arrived within 48 hours and were handled by the county sheriff's office with a thoroughness that suggested someone had made a phone call to someone, which was accurate. Assault charges. Medical restitution. A court date. Hollis did not spend time in a cell, but he spent a great deal of time in the particular purgatory of a man who cannot stop thinking about what he did and who he did it to, which is its own extended sentence. Earl Decker accepted a ride to the hospital from Harris, which he did not want, but agreed to because his ribs were, in fact, cracked, 2 of them, and because Harris asked in a way that did not allow for a graceful refusal. 3 of the 9 men from the team sat with him in the waiting room until he was discharged, not because he asked them to, but because they did not consider leaving. When Earl was helped out to the parking lot with the discharge paperwork and a prescription he would not fill, Harris was leaning against the truck. He handed Earl his cane, which someone had retrieved from the gravel. Earl took it. He looked at it for a moment. Beaumont used a stick the last 2 years I knew him, Earl said. Correa did something to his left knee that never healed right. He paused. He never apologized for it. No, Harris said. I don't imagine he did. Earl looked at him with those pale blue eyes, and something moved in them. Not warmth exactly, but the acknowledgement of warmth, which, in a man of that age and that history, is the same thing. You're good men, Earl said. He said it the way he said everything, quietly, precisely, without decoration. Then he got into the truck. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, Earl Decker was sitting on a bench outside the feed store on the main street of the small town where he had lived for 20 years, eating a breakfast taco from the paper wrapper and watching the traffic move slowly through the morning light when a truck he didn't recognize pulled into the space across the street. Trace Hollis got out. He was not wearing the cut vest. He was in a plain gray shirt and jeans, and he was thinner than he had been. And the thing that had occupied his face in the parking lot that night, the performance of it, the ease of it, was gone, replaced by something that had clearly been arrived at through a process that had not been comfortable. He crossed the street. He stopped in front of the bench. He looked at the watch on Earl's right wrist, and then looked at Earl's face. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for 6 weeks," Hollis said. "I haven't figured it out, so I'm just going to say that I am sorry. For all of it. Every part of it." He paused. "I didn't know who you were." Earl looked at him for a long moment. "It wouldn't have mattered," Earl said quietly, "if I'd been nobody." He let that settle. Then he moved down the bench an inch and tilted his head slightly to the right. Hollis sat. They sat for a while in the morning light, not talking, watching the town go about its Tuesday. The feed store was opening its doors. A dog was crossing the street at an angle that suggested it had somewhere to be. The light was the particular clear gold of a Texas morning before the heat arrived. After a time, Earl finished his taco and folded the wrapper neatly and put it in the bag. "Beaumont told me something once," he said. He was not looking at Hollis. He was looking at the street. He said, "Strength is what you do when there's nothing in it for you." He stood. He settled his weight on the cane. That's the whole thing. That's all there is to it. He walked down the sidewalk at the unhurried pace of a man who has been covering ground for 79 years and has long since stopped measuring distance by speed. Hollis watched him go. He sat on that bench for a long time after, in the warming morning air, with the watch he had been close enough to see and the name he had not known and the sentence Beaumont had delivered through the relay of decades. And he turned it over, the way you turn over something that is going to take the rest of your life to fully understand. There are men like Earl Decker moving through our world every day, eating breakfast tacos on benches, sitting in the back of waiting rooms, walking slowly through hardware stores with canes that they do not apologize for. They do not require your recognition. They have not needed it for a very long time. They carry what they carry the way the earth carries its own weight, without display, without complaint, without ever once suggesting that the load is light. They were asked to do things that the rest of us will never be asked to do, and they did those things, and they came home, and they became ordinary on purpose, not because the past doesn't live in them, but because they understood, somewhere along the way, that dignity does not announce itself. It just shows up, and keeps showing up. For 79 years, and counting. If you were moved by Earl's story of quiet courage and unbreakable dignity, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes. Word count, approximately 3,920 words.